to tell us more about some of the major legal challenges that actually adversely impact on the digital civic space for organizations. Over to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Adrian. So, from our work at Chapter 4, we're seeing a number of trends. The first really is the rise of repressive or regressive laws. And these laws are really coming out of a frustration by members of parliament and other political leaders, basically arising from that frustration of young people and other people who were engaging online, trying to hold them to account. So every time they are put under pressure, the result or the option is, how do we police the online space? And really the objective, as you can see in most of the laws, for example, in Uganda we have the Computer Misuse Act, and recently in 2022 we had an amendment of that same law, is there is not deliberate effort to facilitate conversations or to try and deal with, let's say, disinformation or misinformation. Far from it. The interest and the intention often is to gag and to silence and to make sure that people don't have the space to really express themselves. And so it is something that is deeply concerning, of course, for us as lawyers, that we have constitutions that are generally progressive. We as countries have ratified very many international and regional human rights law that basically expand the freedom of expression to the level that they recognize the internet as a critical component of freedom of expression, as an enabler. But despite those progressive steps, the parliaments are deliberately passing laws to claw back on those freedoms. And I think that our work is cut out as human rights defenders and defenders of freedom of expression, especially on the online space with the rise of AI and other tools. Because while we have these very insightful discussions here in Dakar, there are people who are asking themselves, how do we frustrate expression? How do we silence voices? That's the objective. I wish we would have a conversation about how to deal with disinformation and how to deal with, defamatory statements. That would be a progressive conversation. So we say, okay, criminal defamation should be criminalized. Should not be criminalized. We should be maybe talking about how do we deal with civil defamation and things of that nature, and how do we deal with disinformation, like as we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact it was causing to many people. Those are the conversations we should be having, but unfortunately the objective is to silence and to criminalize. And there are two things that they're really using. The first is the use of vague and overly broad provisions. What those vague provisions do is they extend the administrative powers of enforcing these laws to the law enforcement agencies and other regulators. So they are armed with a law that allows them to grab in the dark whichever way they want to go. And for us as lawyers, when we come up tomorrow to represent you, you're faced with a very vague provision that makes it difficult to provide adequate legal representation. A quick example, finally, Adrian, is the offense of offensive communication under Uganda's Computer Misuse Act, which has since been repealed by the Constitutional Court, so it's no longer law in Uganda. But while that law still existed in our law books, there's a gentleman who was arrested called Robert Shaka. When Robert Shaka was arrested, the police claimed that he had engaged in offensive communication using a computer to harass many people under the disguised name of Tom Voltaire Okwalinga, popularly known as TVO. But when Robert Shaka was arrested, as it is in most of those cases, there is never any evidence that can justify. That's always one. So you're essentially using the criminal justice system to punish, harass HRDs, and frustrate them, and send others into censorship. But the second and last point is the issue of excessive or abusive ways in which these laws are enforced. There's no judicious application. While we are dealing with people who are engaging online to attack women and other people in all manners of attacks, non-consensual distribution of intimate images and everything, you'll never see the police take action to try and hold such people to account. But you'll see those sections, those vague sections, being used to target people who are engaged in political expression. So it is a concerning trend as far as legislation and enforcement is concerned.
Thank you, Anthony. Ladies and gentlemen, the things they are talking about are not only from the country he mentioned, Uganda. We have seen them in Tanzania. We have seen them in Ethiopia. We have seen them in Kenya. We have seen them across West Africa. So I just want to move on from that and ask one of my friends, Gelila, what is the story like in Ethiopia? We have heard a lot. What do you have to say about these issues?
Okay, so I hope you can hear my voice, right? I tend to talk to myself when I present. So I'm grateful for this opportunity and to speak in front of such eloquent and richly seasoned people, also from the podium. As a young human right related program manager, I've had direct experiences in what is being discussed right now in this side event. And let me briefly mention what I've noticed so far in case of Ethiopia and also other countries, right? Because what is happening is not only like a single country matter, it's a continental issue. That's why we're here, because it's a common agenda and it's a common problem. So apparently this is an African issue, and this is in fact more than an African issue, it's a global issue, hence requesting for a global action, but also a tailored action to Africa. So, of course, HRDs, especially WHRDs, women human rights defenders, as well as media personalities, face a lot of challenges from different actors, not only state actors, but different actors. And they're naturally victims of the so-called digital divide, right? Not only that, but they also are victims of unfair algorithmic-based content moderation. But aside from that, focusing on the government-controlled elements, we can define or we can identify various pressures and threats that are also very much cognizant of what is happening in Ethiopia. A case in point is what my brother just eloquently described as having increasingly restrictive laws, or the regression towards the restrictive interpretation of laws. Whatever the case, the vagueness dilemma of how laws are created and how laws are vaguely interpreted leaves HRDs, WHRDs, PWD HRDs, and media personalities as victims, largely, right? So basically, in case of Ethiopia, what is truly sad is that these things are being merged or happening in case of especially state of emergencies, right? State of emergencies are particular circumstances whereby the executive gets an extended arm to do whatever is politically correct. And when that is added alongside the precedent of internet shutdowns and human rights violations, you can imagine what that looks like for HRDs, right? So it sort of creates a spaghetti bowl of challenges whereby when the internet is back on, we are faced with a whole lot of new dilemmas, right? Aside from this, we can also mention internet disruption I've just mentioned, but I have not mentioned intentional or targeted government surveillance without having the judicial or even the legal system catch up with such advanced technology, such as AI or facial recognition or even CCT systems. So the judicial is right here, and the judicial capacity is right here, and the technology is advancing right there. So in between, what happens is largely political. So in between, what happens is HRDs are again victimized. And lastly, what happens is online violence, especially against women human rights defenders or human rights defenders belonging to minority groups, are increasingly facing this unfortunate circumstance, whether it's harassment or whether it's smear campaign to name and shame their work, right? And what I want to highlight at the end of my little submission is whatever is happening online is also being backed by offline harassment, offline intimidation, offline human rights violations and abuses by both state and non-state actors. So we should not really view or narrow down our view and perspective of this particular question to online settings, rather have a more integrated perspective of how they actually face increasing challenges in a broader perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Galila. And of course, moving on from this, you will feel that the threats are real. I know she's fallen a victim of such. She's not yet shared. Probably she'll share at another time. But I want to move on from that and remind you about the role of civil society organizations, especially in as far as democratic and electoral processes are actually concerned. We know that civil society plays a fundamental role in observation of elections and trying to ensure that the process goes well by reporting issues as they unfold. But increasingly, governments have been coming in to limit the participation of civil society and independent election observers because they do not want them to expose the flaws in the electoral processes. This is when it brings me to Emile to tell us about the experiences, especially as far as elections and how they affect civil society operations in Togo, not alone, but covering the continent as well. Emile, over to you.
Ok, merci. Bon, je vais parler du cas du Togo. Comme en Afrique, les élections ont toujours eu un impact sur la société civile. Récemment, on a eu des élections en avril, je crois, et c'était des élections assez décisives, où on a eu à changer notre constitution. C'est bon? Ok. On a eu à changer notre constitution. Et au cours de ces élections, il y a eu beaucoup de réprimandes. La société civile c'est bon pour tout le monde? C'est bon? Is it okay? Okay, let's go now. Ok. Impact des élections sur les organisations de la société civile en Afrique. Les élections en Afrique ont un impact significatif sur les opérations des organisations de la société civile. Le processus électoral entraîne souvent des restrictions accrues sur l'espace civique, ce qui peut entraver la capacité des organisations de la société civile à fonctionner efficacement. Par exemple, pendant les périodes électorales, de nombreux gouvernements imposent des règlements qui limitent les activités des sociétés civiles, en particulier. Ok. En particulier celles impliquées dans la surveillance des élections et de la promotion des pratiques démocratiques. Cette tendance a été observée dans divers pays africains où l'environnement pour la société civile devient plus répressif à l'approche des élections, entraînant souvent des violences, des intimidations des activistes et les organisations principaux. Voici quelques défis que rencontrent les organisations de la société civile dans un cas général en Afrique. Maintenant, je vais parler des élections récentes qu'on a eues au Togo. puisque récemment, je ne sais pas si vous le savez, mais le Togo n'est plus une république. Maintenant, on a le régime parlementaire. Donc, la constitution a été changée et la population n'était pas vraiment au courant. Un matin, on s'est réveillé et on dit non, on veut changer la constitution dans le pays. Tout le monde était étonné. Les organisations de la société civile ont voulu s'organiser pour informer la population, pour demander qu'est-ce qui se passe exactement dans le pays. C'était compliqué. Il y a eu certains qui ont eu envie de parler sur Internet, ils ont parlé et ils ont été arrêtés. Certains ont passé 2 à 3 semaines en garde à vue. Après, ils ont été libérés, mais ils ont été condamnés à 6 mois avec sursis. Donc, c'est un peu ça l'écosystème actuellement au Togo. Merci.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Emile. And that would bring me to Omalara on that side. Omalara, could you please share some experience, what some of the key measures you think can actually be undertaken to better CSO's engagement in the electoral processes without really feeling so threatened and being clamped down? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That question is interesting. Without us feeling threatened and clamped down, I think that the threat is built into the system. We will always feel threatened as long as we live in a world that we are required to ask for our humanity from systems of oppression. I really wish that I was here to share measures that we can use to protect ourselves, but I'm not. I've made a few notes. So I'm going to start with countering misinformation and disinformation as one of these measures. And this is not about, the government clamping down on misinformation. This is us looking at the government as an agent of misinformation and disinformation and being critical about how we engage in these spaces. So we must understand, and my brother from Uganda was speaking about how, how the civic space is closing. And to my mind, I can easily link the creation of technology, which I do believe is part of, is born out of a system of oppression, imperialism, colonialism, and neocolonialism. And I don't expect such a system to not reproduce itself in our local context. So therefore, if a system is faulty, and I'm very generous by saying faulty, because I do believe the system was built exactly how it needs to operate, to oppress. Now, our governments, of course, must dance to the tune of the hegemony by clamping down on individual freedoms. Because under systems of oppression, even our governments do not particularly have the power that we feign to have, because we are surrounded by an economic landscape of neoliberalist policies that keep us, impoverished, both individually and collectively. So when I think about, safety measures, I think we must begin to look at the underpinnings of technology and how they operate and how they can be used. Secondly, I would like to speak about decentering tech companies as the future of our countries. I always insist that technology is a tool, and if that tool is not working, we must keep it accountable, we must scrutinize it, we must sanitize it. The treatment of technology as something that exists in of itself and that we human beings cannot impact it and that all we must do must just be to follow through and just kind of obey it is beyond me. And I think it's something that we need to start seriously looking at as human rights defenders, as people who work within a democracy. And that question got me thinking about how, in many occasions, we think of democracy, and it's not our fault. I do it too. We all do it because of the machine of disinformation and misinformation. Now we conflate democracy with elections. But democracy also includes preservation of human rights. Democracy also includes the protection and you know, alignment with the Constitution, because the Constitution is under a democracy, it's supposed to be, you know, superior, right? It gives the powers and limits the powers and ensures that we don't overdo it as a collective, right? However, we live in systems where the Constitution is nothing but a suggestion, and therefore, of course, we will be clamped down on. Of course, we will believe that these systems, like constitutionality and subverting constitutions under a democracy, is a symptom of the fact that we live in a white supremacist, you know, neo-colonial world. And so, therefore, when we think about our safety measures, you know, we must obviously do our cybersecurity. We must take care of ourselves. However, there are larger questions that kind of create the reality that we exist in. Lastly, we must organize even when there are no elections. We must remain, you know, try to maintain our safety even when there are no elections. Increasingly, we are realizing how the role that data plays in our online, you know, engagements. And as activists, we must not wait for the 4 years to begin to prepare, or 6 years, whatever is obtainable. I'm sorry, I'm Nigerian and it's 4 years in my country. We must not wait until the election period. Safety as a priority. It is important for all times, especially because the civic space is threatened whether there is an election or not. As a feminist, as a woman, I know that I don't need elections to feel oppression in society, attacks, to feel, you know, to feel the impact of technology-facilitated, you know, violence, be it sexual or just gendered, right? So it's important for us to think of our safety as the things that we can do. But the question is, what can we do if the system is meant to perpetuate a certain set of circumstances? So we must kind of think of it as, yes, we must protect ourselves, absolutely. We must do the work to counter disinformation and misinformation. But we must move away from the narrative that something is inherently, you know, wrong with the people and that they are the drivers of this misinformation, because we realize that there are so many circumstances under which we find that, you know, this misinformation is used to drum up panic, is used to drum up dissent, you know. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Omalara. Thank you for that strong submission. I hope everybody has heard. You must protect yourself way before. And Brian, as a man, what are some of these tools you think we should use?
Unfortunately, the tools I know could be used by anyone. Not specifically men. So, like I said earlier, I think the biggest problem that civil society organizations face is the lack of awareness of the risks that they are exposed to as they are adopting technology. Also, the lack of awareness of the tools that they can use, and there are many. So it could take me a whole day to try to give out a list of tools. However, I think the best thing that we can do is build capacity and make ourselves aware of the tools that we could use, and also aware of the threats and vulnerabilities that technology exposes us to.
All right, Brian, thank you. Before I open up, I'm going to ask each of these people to give us some of course, I'll be guiding on what they're supposed to do. I'll start with Helen, because she was the first person to speak. Helen, could you please tell us some of the key measures that actually CSOs, HRIDs can undertake to counter some of the emerging digital threats that affect their work?
Thank you, Adrian. It's difficult for me to answer this question after Brian, because he's the IT guy, but from a layperson's perspective, I think as civil society and human rights defenders, our biggest threat right now is the trolls and the bots that we have. Many times you see a human rights defender or CSO being trolled on social media and they are fighting it alone. Even women human rights defenders and feminists, and you're feeling like the pressure is on. So I believe one of the measures that we need to do is have online reputation management. let's have clear and consistent narratives about the work that we do, because the perpetrators use it to discredit our work, and then before you know it, the public believes in them and the public opinion has been changed. We have been called agents of foreigners or foreign interests. We have been called enemies of the state. So I always believe one of the measures we need to do is, I don't know if our funding partners can help us with that. If they buy boats, let's buy the boats also. Nigeria versus South Africa, and the challenge and the quarrel is on for a week. But when it comes to human rights defenders, feminists, and women human rights defenders, someone is going it alone. So if we can organize around that, but also building alliances and solidarity networks. It can be regional, international, and international, because these networks will help us to have emergency support, but also technical assistance. Like Brian said, most of human rights defenders here so don't have the technical capability to be able to use the tools that we have. But someone elsewhere in another country, another region can have it and give you the assistance that you need. And then I think we also need to make use of AI, of artificial intelligence. Let's use it to help us to...
Those things that we need to do to make sure that we regulate or tame some of these things. Because I think if we don't, then certain fairly rational legislators may think that it's okay to criminalize this information because they can see the impact. Maybe someone has lost life because they read something somewhere, and then they say, maybe we should criminalize it. And then finally, Edwin, is the issue of, just a second, yes, the issue of an HRD protection law. Because, I mean, we're looking to protect defenders, right? That conversation is important. But for any of us who are engaged in advocating for HRD protection laws, it is important to pay attention to the politics of your country, the domestic politics. While it is a noble venture to advocate for a law that seeks to protect human rights defenders, I think you need to pay attention to who is in parliament. Who are these people going to pass these laws? Because there are certain situations where you can't bring a well-intentioned law and end up causing what we call unintended consequences. For example, providing for criminalization of HRD work or providing for certification and those manner of things. So I think we need to be very cautious, careful as we continue to push back and defend for the freedom that, HRDs and civil society should be enjoying. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anthony, from that is when I'll cross to Gelila and ask her, for example, in the wake of increased government controls and suppression, and in the wake of enhanced controls over the civic space, how have you dealt with it? How have you dealt with that issue in Ethiopia, and how do you think others should deal with it?
Okay. So, as a sort of disclaimer, I don't know if I should be happy or sad. Mr. Anthony mentioned every point that I prepared. So that's a disclaimer. But I will try to mention at least 25% of what is left of it, yeah? So particular to the Ethiopian case, and then I'll come back to my points, what we have done so far, because of late there had been an increase in pressures and threats directed against human rights-based civil society organizations and human rights defenders, but also media personalities. So there has been an outbreak, not really an outbreak, but a regression towards old state ways, towards a plethora of threats and pressures ranging from arrest to forced fleeing to another country, right? So anything that is in between includes online harassment and threats as well. So what has really worked has been an act of solidarity, right? And that's what I also want to recommend today. The coming together approach never disappoints. And when the coming together approach actually takes regional level and international level. And when international partners say, we're here with you, and when regional actors say, we're here with you, that's a huge diplomatic and naming and shaming instrument, right? And when I actually refer to solidarity, it does not mean just like some form of a nominal show of solidarity. It also is like a protection extension in terms of relocation support, or it could be some form of, some form of support that goes beyond nominal expression of solidarity, although the nominal part is also very valuable. Because in these circumstances, you see who's there and who's really not. That's what we have seen, right? So coming to my point, I've been saying the multi-approach the whole day, so I'm going to retract from that, and I want to propose a new, not a new one, but it's an oldie but goodie type of approach, which is the integrated approach, whereby civil society organizations come together alongside other sector partners from the private sector, from the public sector, but also from the digital sector. And they plan an integrated approach towards effective advocacy, right? So I would call it as a collective response or a collective advocacy agenda, right? So next year in the forum, it could be that. And it would be very practical and pragmatic. It would be very measurable in the sense that X would do specific activities and Y would do specific activities. And there will be monitoring and evaluation involved in those lines of allocating activities. So it would definitely be measurable, and there will be outputs associated with it. So in that integrated approach, I would also foresee different layers of protection mechanisms being solicited for human rights defenders, especially the most vulnerable ones. For instance, physical and digital security, including psychosocial security, and relocation facilitation as well. Not only that, but also core funding and core financing, especially at grassroots level, whereby we slowly bring peripherally located CSOs to the center so that they can also voice their concerns. So what has worked is the act of solidarity. So let's work on that, make it more concrete, and rather than a piecemeal intervention, let's think about more integrated and practical interventions. And by next year, we would have something very tangible to be proud of, right? But we also celebrate little wins. We celebrate this too. Thank you.
Thank you, Galila. I'll cross to Omolara, sorry. Omolara, can elections be manned without curtailing the digital civic space for CSOs? If the answer is yes, how?
What am I, the government? I don't know if I can answer that question. Can elections be carried out without curtailing the civic space? We have seen across the world that that is not the reality. And not just Africa, we've seen across the world how the digital space is used to manipulate thought, conscience, behavior, voters' decisions, and all of that stuff. So the question, should it be? Absolutely yes. I want to live in a world where we have freedoms and we are able to engage, and we have that independence, and especially like our thought conscience and who we vote for, who leads us. I want us to be able to choose, our destiny, in quotes. But can it? Is it? Not right now. But what can we do to get from no, not right now, to a possibility in the future? I love that you mentioned solidarity, and I wanted to give an example. A couple of months ago, some people were outing queer feminist activists in Nigeria, especially from the north, and they were doing this using X and the other apps and all of that stuff. And I don't know, I'm not on Twitter, but somehow I don't know what I was doing. I saw somebody repost something where another organization had said, oh, you know, this logo looks like ours, but we just want to distance ourselves from this and this and this. And that got me thinking about the divisions amongst us as activists. How do we move from point A to point B, challenging a united, intentional, well-funded machine of oppression, if we are playing respectability politics and identity politics? Like, oh no, I'm a feminist, but not that kind of feminist. I'm an activist, but not that kind of activist. We all must be ready to be unruly and ungovernable in a world of oppression, because those differences that tear us apart are points of unity. I was going to say united. Unity amongst the systems that do seek to oppress us. They will not ask you who you are before they put you in that dark van. They will not say, you know. So it's important for us to practice, you know, the feminist principles of solidarity that allows us to come together to understand that we don't live single issue lives and that we have a unique interaction with oppression depending on where we stand in our lives, depending on how we are, you know, depending on just what our intersections, you know, really are. So that's one thing. The second thing is I was thinking of digital literacy, but in the sense of critical consciousness. In the sense of us living in the consciousness that that these things that we see are not anomalies. I think in my former life as a human rights activist, as a human rights lawyer, I bought into the idea that, oh, the government is great, but they just have these weaknesses, or we must step into that reality that these systems are created to work in this way. We may have enjoyed some freedom in the past because the stakes were not as high, but the higher the stakes, the more the pushback is going to be. So how do we prepare ourselves for that reality? And then finally, I would speak about the third thing: how do we move from a reality where we don't have those freedoms and elections impact, you know, impact our lives in sometimes irredeemable ways, and the civic space is shrinking and all of that. I would love for us to do work that goes beyond, you know, the seasonal thing. I want us to do work that goes, you know, further and deeper into the consciousness of things, into why things are, and much more than that, to empower one another. You know, for example, you were describing bots and trolls and all of that earlier. I was learning in an earlier panel that the reason why some things don't get flagged online is because when they enjoy popularity, when they are viral, they are determined to be something that the collective is interested in. And so even when it is misinformation, even when it is harmful, those things are just okay. So the question is, when are we going to stop? When are we going to push back against the people that profit from our harm? Thank you.
Okay, Emily, just want one thing. How do we keep safe online during elections? And then I'll pick.
Je pense que nos gouvernements ont trop de pouvoir sur la société civile, que pour pouvoir avoir un espace civique assez relax et tout, il va falloir qu'on coopère. Il va falloir forcément la coopération du gouvernement, sinon ça ne va pas vraiment fonctionner. La société civile n'a pas autant de pouvoir parce que vous avez envie de faire quelque chose, mais vous ne pouvez pas le faire en fait, parce qu'on va vous arrêter et vous allez vous défendre comment? Voilà, j'ai quelques suggestions, mais il va falloir forcément que le gouvernement puisse coopérer également. Donc, établir des cadres juridiques robustes, les gouvernements devraient adopter et faire respecter des lois protégeant des libertés numériques, garantissant que les organisations de la société civile et les défenseurs des droits de l'homme puissent opérer sans crainte et censure ou de représailles. Réguler aussi la surveillance. Mettre en place des réglementations limitant la surveillance gouvernementale des activités en ligne, protégeant ainsi la vie privée des individus et des organisateurs. Promouvoir également la transparence des processus électoraux, initiative de données ouvertes, encourager la publication des données et des processus électoraux pour promouvoir la responsabilité et la transparence. Permettre aux organisations de la société civile de surveiller et de rendre compte de l'intégrité électorale. Améliorer la sensibilisation et l'éducation du public. Des campagnes de littératie numérique, mettre en œuvre des campagnes pour éduquer les citoyens sur leurs droits numériques et l'importance de participer au processus électoral, en ligne également. Établir des mécanismes de signalement des violations, des systèmes de signalement d'incendie, créer des systèmes accessibles pour signaler les violations des droits numériques ou les abus électoraux, permettant des réponses rapides et une responsabilité accrue. Merci.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before, I want to welcome 2 questions and 2 comments from our attendants. If you don't have questions, it's okay. If you don't have comment, it's okay. But we are limited to only 2 questions and 2 comments. Yes. Yeah, I saw the first hands were here. So whether there are comments or then I'll get questions from the ladies.
Very quick. I'll try to be quick. Thank you very much. Thank you for the panelists also. I mean, it has been really informative and also really pushing forward to build a more sustainable ecosystem of civil society. Because I think one thing that is very important is that we need to build a very strong network. A very strong network, we need to build it. And also have the means to enforce our decisions. When I say the means, it's money. How could we make it possible? And one thing that the ladies just mentioned is very important. In Africa, or especially here in Senegal, whenever we talk about civil society, it's only about elections. You just not need to focus on election. We need to focus on the real matters, the real rights, the real problems that our society are facing. Building awareness is only one thing. And I think maybe the session is too short. One thing that I would advocate is at least to have these meetups regularly through times. Maybe having a meet session, a Zoom session, putting together all civil society, not only in Senegal, but everywhere in Africa, in the world, those who really want to enforce change, so that we can come with an agenda, so that we can come also with a real program and a real offer, what we put to the stakes, and be prepared. Because if we're not prepared, I mean, all the regulations, everything that we can see from the government would be enforced to us, would be forced to us, and we'll just hear counter-attacking. We need to find solution on our own and propose things on the table. I think if we do that, we may build something which is really sustainable and would really help the population. And the last thing is build awareness. We need it. If the population is not helping us, if they are not aware of the issues at stakes, whenever we talk about disinformation, whenever we talk about trolling, all of those things, if they don't have digital literacy, it's a huge problem. Only a few people would benefit from it, and the majority would be left behind. So thank you very much. So, Omar Ndiaye from Eshikam. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir à tous. Merci aux panélistes pour les diverses interventions. C'était très riche. Moi, je souhaiterais intervenir par rapport au contexte togolais. Je me présente d'abord. Je suis Guy Valère Badanaro. Je viens du Togo. Je suis défenseur des droits de l'homme, chargé du monitoring des droits de l'homme du CACIT. Et pour ce qui concerne mon travail, je coordonne au jour le jour un dispositif d'alerte communautaire sur toute l'étendue du territoire composé de 87 personnes qui nous permet de collecter des informations sur les violations des droits de l'homme. Donc, je vais intervenir par rapport au contexte du Togo, qui est un contexte plutôt particulier. On est parti de janvier jusqu'à maintenant dans un processus électoral, mais aussi dans un processus de changement de constitution. Donc, mon compatriote Namissi, en intervenant, a parlé de deux cas précis qui ont fait l'objet de deux jeunes qui ont été arrêtés pour avoir pris la parole, pour avoir parlé d'une part de la révision de la Constitution et d'autre part de l'impact que cette révision a sur le processus électoral. Alors pour être bref, on s'est réveillé au Togo le 25 mars 2024 et on était dans une nouvelle république. Et par la suite, il y a deux jeunes qui ont pris la parole et qui ont donc dénoncé cela. Et d'une part, il y a eu un impact puisque le processus électoral avait été suspendu pour qu'on puisse aller consulté en quelque sorte les différentes couches sociales pour avoir leur approbation donc, sur la révision de la Constitution. Ils ont été arrêtés le 9 mai, dans la nuit du 9 au 10 mai. Ils ont été envoyés à la prison civile de Lomé le 14 mai. Ils vont être condamnés le 29 mai à 6 mois de prison avec sursis. Et la particularité de cette affaire, c'est que ces deux jeunes, qui n'étaient pas des défenseurs des droits de l'homme à titre professionnel, sont devenus activistes des droits humains à partir du moment où ils sont intervenus donc, pour dénoncer cela. Et la deuxième particularité de cette affaire, c'est qu'ils l'ont fait par le biais des réseaux sociaux, par l'espace numérique. Donc cela caractérise de façon accrue donc, cette restriction qui se fait au moment électoral, mais aussi dans un contexte aussi particulier, comme lors du changement de constitution. Donc c'est le cas, c'est le souci qui se pose actuellement au Togo. Et l'autre chose, c'est que nous sommes dans une période transitoire. Et même si la nouvelle constitution qui a été adoptée et promulguée le 6 mai 2024 a fait une réforme en permettant à la haute autorité de l'audiovisuel et de la communication de couvrir un tout petit peu ce qui tourne autour du numérique, parce que traditionnellement, elle ne le fait pas, et que par la suite, le code de la presse qui régule un tout petit peu les activités des journalistes ne prend pas en compte le numérique, parce que l'article 3 de ce code-là enlève carrément les activités numériques du métier de journaliste. Donc voilà un tout petit peu le problème. Donc il y a deux problèmes qui se posent. Il n'y a pas de loi qui protège les défenseurs des droits de l'homme, qu'ils soient professionnels, et les activistes. Et il n'y a pas cette protection qui est offerte aux journalistes quand ceux-ci interviennent en quelque sorte en utilisant les moyens numériques. Donc le problème se pose encore plus quand on intervient dans un contexte assez tendu comme les élections et comme lors de la révision de la Constitution. Alors qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire? Au Togo spécifiquement, le défi est d'arriver en quelque sorte à faire adopter cette loi qui protège les défenseurs des droits de l'homme et les activistes, mais aussi de faire en sorte que l'utilisation du numérique par le journaliste puisse être couverte et que les journalistes ne se retrouvent pas donc au devant de la loi ou fassent l'objet de harcèlement juridique à chaque fois qu'ils interviennent. Parce que nous, au CACIT, on porte des assistances à des journalistes, et depuis le début de l'année, il y a un certain nombre de journalistes que nous avons assistés dans ces périples-là. Donc nous continuons le plaidoyer au niveau du CACIT pour que cette loi soit adoptée et que par la suite, il y ait la couverture des activités numériques par les régulateurs pour la protection des journalistes. Donc voilà un tout petit peu l'apport que je voulais faire par rapport au contexte togolais. Merci.
Thank you very much. He's spoken quite a number of issues. I have heard all of them. I have listened. I think most of them were comments and recommendations, right? Yes, yes. And just a moment. I want to hear from two ladies. We've got either one question will be enough. And then, so Florence, over to you. And then I will ask Masake to speak and we'll be done.
Thank you, panelists, for those insights. I sort of was reflecting on everything that has been shared and everything I've heard since the forum started. And of course, looking at the topic that we're addressing now, building resilience, I feel like we've become experts in navigating the threats because we are quite familiar with what's about to come. But then sort of I'm wondering, looking at the longer term, what have we learned from all these experiences that could inform a strategy towards prevention, as opposed to always preparing for the worst? So a long-term vision. So I'm really thinking of solutions because I think we are quite abreast with the problems at this stage, and it should count for something. From these experiences, what do we see as, however modest it is, that we should think towards for prevention? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know who I will choose. Anthony, what did you want to say?
Very briefly in a minute. The issue of funding, very important. My point here is that we need, and I think it's tied again what Florence has just shared. At country levels, we need to engage the donors and the embassies and influence their country strategies. so that they can put the money to where we can achieve the most impact. So you need to stand up and speak and just push back and clarify that this is where we're going to achieve the most impact. There was something to do with regulators. I just wanted to say something very brief. I think that regulators, it's important that we work with them more as partners, especially when you're working in a context where there is really closing civic space and the politics is really harmful. So, in other words, even when a regulator is doing something that is adverse, sometimes it's important to look at where the problem is coming from and look at the longer term goal that you're trying to push, because at the end, there are gradual gains that can come from that sort of work. On prevention, you know, Maina Kiai, the former UN Special Rapporteur, one time attended our Human Rights Convention in Kampala, and we had a whole day discussing about the state of freedoms in the country, in Uganda. And at the end of the day, the man said, listening to you, it looks like all the problems you've talked about, all of them end on plot 1. So, and he was referring to State House. So the bottom line really is that the politics has everything to do with the problems we're having to deal with today. If the politics were better, things would probably be much better, because there would be accountability, people would think twice about their actions and know that there's a price they will pay. But in the absence of democratic values within the political class, then we are bound to kind of be pushing back and trying to win as little as we can. But I agree with you that we need to kind of be that proactive. Then finally, the issue of awareness. Citizen agency, Adrian, is a very big problem, broadly on human rights issues, but also on these issues of internet freedoms. Many people don't understand what internet freedoms really mean. Most of them are stuck with the local FM radio stations. When we come here and discuss about this internet, this is really our conversation here. Many people are with their FM stations and they're listening and they're going on with life. So we need to have that critical mass, raise awareness, get citizens to speak up and stand with us as we are demanding for better legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On that note, may we clap for our panelists. Let's clap for our panelists, and we can clap for ourselves. All right, thank you very much for all taking part. This time I want to release you to go up for the final session, which is the closing session where the report is also going to be launched. Thank you so much. My panelists will take a picture with you, but the rest can go. Thank you very much for taking part, and thank you for being a great crowd. Yeah. Actually, that's we're in the same speech.